let's pivot over to kind of your hedge fund experience. So you go to JHL after TPG, right? I feel like PE and hedge funds, those are kind of like the two most sought after or common exit opportunities for banking analysts, right? So having done both, I feel like you have a unique perspective on kind of the similarities and differences between the two. I guess, can you talk about that a little bit? And also, why make the switch from TPG over to a hedge fund? And also, like, I know the fund that you were in, based on your LinkedIn profile, it was called Global Opportunistic Multi-Strategy. So, like, what does that
Yeah,
mean?
what does that mean? Yeah. So toward the end of my time at TPG, I knew I wanted to go to business school and I knew I wanted to go into the public markets. And that's a very
Mm,
normal kind of path that folks in private equity may choose. I think the main reason for me wanting to go into the public markets was as we worked on things at TPG, as we worked on names there were names that we did a ton of work on where I was like, I actually don't love this business. In fact, if we were able to bet bidirectionally, I would probably short this business. And we've now
mm,
done enough work to have conviction in a direction we think this is heading. And at that point in private equity, you put your pens down and you move on, right? Because private equity is long only, it's control, at least
mm,
in the strategy we were working on at TPG. And so, for me, technology investing required in my view that we needed to be flexible and that it's hard to have 3 to 5 year views. I mean, think about how much the world has changed since ChatGPT launched, less than 3 years ago. So
I don't remember what that was like before ChatGPT, to
yeah,
be honest.
yeah, exactly. So things change really fast. And so 3 to 5 year kind of hold periods, you really have to have conviction in a durable asset. And that is something that private equity is very, very good at identifying. For me, I
Yeah.
was interested in two-way investing. I was interested in kind of real time, higher velocity. That has its own
Mm,
challenges for sure. But that was the reason why I was interested in public markets. So I'll answer kind of what is global opportunistic multi-strat, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the differences structurally between the two. So
yeah.
I was at Wharton doing my MBA, and then my girlfriend at the time, now wife, was in Chicago doing her residency in pediatrics. And so I promised her I would come to Chicago. So I only interviewed, or I tried to only focus on Chicago-based hedge funds. And I was very, very lucky. There was this fund I had never heard of called JHL. It's the initials of the guy who founded it, Jim Litinsky. Was very lucky that they were doing on-campus recruiting, interviewing at Wharton, and he was running a $2 billion hedge fund in Chicago with a small team. And his fund was a best ideas, willing to get concentrated portfolio. So what opportunistic means is we're not just going to have, kind of 60 names in the portfolio that are sized, differently, but they're all kind of in 2 or 3 sectors. And we're just going to run a portfolio of like software names, right? Opportunistic meant you could go anywhere, any company, any industry, and you're willing to get concentrated. And so, from my perspective, that was a lot like private equity investing. That was very like, I want to know this name really well. I want it to
Yeah.
be an asymmetric return opportunity, and I want to have a multi year point of view. So, best ideas, opportunistic is kind of what that means. Global, we could go anywhere. We could go to Europe, go to Asia. Like, he really had flexibility, and he was honestly, he was probably the smartest guy I've ever worked with. He had earned the credibility in building up a $2 billion fund to be able to
Yeah.
go kind of have a point of view on foreign exchange rates in Southeast Asia, credit portfolios in Japan or in Europe. And then it's long short, so he could have a long or short view on credit or equity, so any asset class.
Yeah.
And what else? Global opportunistic, long short, multi strategy. So any asset class. Multi strat just means, you can invest in
Mm.
secured credit, unsecured credit, converts, equity,
So
derivatives. Like
basically, you guys just had like maximum flexibility with your mandate, basically.
we did. And again, this was all testament to just how, I mean, he was like a top decile fund performer during the downturn and had
Yeah.
raised a ton of capital on the back of that. And with this concentrated strategy was very, very successful. And so I was really lucky. Like I was really lucky. I got the internship. I got to work there for 14 weeks in 2014. One of the best pieces of advice I got from my mentor was build your own relationship with your PM. So he would come to me and ask me to look at a certain name, and then people at the fund would have their biases about what they thought his view on it was or what his angle was. And so there was like a name I worked on when I was an intern where I was like, this is actually kind of interesting. I think I have a long view. And I would talk to people at the fund and they were like, he came to you with an instinct that this would be a short opportunity. Like maybe you shouldn't pitch a long to him. And my mentor was like, you got to have your own relationship. Like you're there to build trust with your PM. So you should follow your gut. Don't just kind of do what you think he wants to hear. And so I did, and that we ended up building a great relationship on that basis. And so I went there and I worked there for 3 years, was very lucky to get a full-time offer, and grew
Yeah.
into a managing director. And I basically covered kind of technology, software, internet for him. I also did, I ended up becoming more of a generalist. This is actually really unusual as you grow in your career. Usually, as in
Right.
your career, you get more specialized. I got there to do kind of software, internet, tech. I, looked at semiconductors, like a lot of the stuff I was familiar with from banking and from TPG. And then he encouraged me and gave me rope to go learn about financial institutions. So by the end of my time there, I was covering banks in India, and I was like doing real estate investments in India, was looking at credits in Europe, and was looking at consumer retail in the US. And he was very open to me saying, he came to me once and he was like, can you look at, do you have a point of view on Fox as a media asset? And I was just like, and I felt very, this is again, credit to him. I felt very comfortable saying in that moment, I don't understand that business well enough to be able to give you an answer right now. And so he was
Yeah.
like, that's totally fine. Go do the work and come back. And, he was like, why don't you spend 4 hours on it and then come back with a point of view? And I was like, 4 hours is not enough time to understand Fox and a large media conglomerate. He was willing to push people to kind of do the focused work quickly, what really matters, and then to extend that. So, I worked on Qualcomm, and, it was like 4 hours, and then it was a week, and then I spent a month on it, and I went out to San Diego and met the executive team, all as part of my thesis building for that security. So it was a
Yeah,
great,
because I was gonna ask, like, even though the fund itself is, global and multi-strategy, and you have, maximum flexibility as a fund, the people that are being hired in, I was gonna ask, like, are you guys more specialists, or kind of like, do you have to be a jack of all trades? It sounds like for most people, you're supposed to go in and really specialize, especially as you move up, which makes sense because you got to be really, really, really good at like whatever it is that you're focused on, right? But it sounds like for you too, also, it's like learning how to learn,
yeah,
like
yeah.
how to you have 4 hours to dive into this new business that you know nothing about and then come back with your thoughts. Like you have to know how to like learn and absorb new information quickly, and also like what to look for, and going back to what you said, it's like what really matters. Like I'm sure you applied all those things in this role as well,
Yeah,
right?
it really compounded while I was there. I really felt like I grew up a lot in my 3 years at JHL. And I think it really hammered home for me that no matter how much time you have to look at something, you have to have a point of view. You will be like, you are just not useful if you don't have a point of view. And for the hedge fund, the objective was, are you interested in having a long or short position on this? And then we can figure out
Right.
the structure of that position. But in every role that you have to have a view. You cannot just be there to provide information and let somebody else do the thinking, the hard thinking. And you're not going to be
Yeah.
right. I'm rarely right the first time I develop a point of view. But the great thing about that job was we would look at 2 to 3 names a week, and we would really kind of turn things around. And then once we got to a point where we were like, hey, this is interesting, I want to spend more time on this, then we'd have freedom to go spend weeks or months on a single name because it was really a best ideas place.
Yeah.
And we did
Yeah.
private equity style work to the extent you can in the public market.
Yeah.
In terms of your initial question on differences between private equity and public markets, I mean, there are so many differences, but fundamentally, as an investor, as a thoughtful investor, you can distill some of the what really matters, what do you need to believe, what are the key levers that drive the business,
Yeah.
understanding leadership styles, leadership instincts, what you think of the leadership team, and when put under pressure, have they thought through everything? That's really important on both sides. The styles of work are different. Private equity, you get full access to in a data room and you're under NDA and you get
Right.
material non-public information. In the public markets, you're really trying to, it's like mosaic theory. You have to kind of stitch together all the possible information you can find and then have a point of
Yeah.
view and distill it down to signals versus noise.
I guess if I frame that question slightly differently, which is, I think for our audience, what would be most useful is if there's someone right now who's like very torn between the two paths, what questions should they be asking themselves to kind of like figure out which one is more like a better fit for them? Or is it like, if you're not sure, then I would do this first because that gives you more optionality? Or, I don't know, like, how would you think about that decision?
Your second question, I think, is easier. I would do private equity first, for sure.
Mm,
Private equity is a longer duration investment strategy and asset class. So going there, doing that training gives you a ton of relevance to public markets. I think it is hard. I don't know of a lot of examples of folks who've gone from the public markets back into private equity. So I would say from a directional standpoint, just like banking to private equity, I would go to private equity first. So I guess I'll make two comments on your first question. One, I've really loved every job I've had. Been very lucky to just have like great jobs with great people where I've learned a lot.
You've had like a bunch of really amazing jobs, honestly.
Yeah. And I had preferences, right? When I was in private equity, I was interested in public markets. When I was in public markets, I had a deep appreciation for how good of a business private equity is, right? It's like the grass is always greener. If you're sitting there and you're saying, I'm interested in private equity and in public markets, how do I decide which one I should go into? I think part of it is a velocity question and part of it is a temperament question. So in private equity, you're doing longer cycles of work, more detailed work. You're really getting into, a ton of detail on a business, and you have multiple rounds of diligence and so on to decide, and you're taking a long-term point of view. So the velocity is a lot slower, right? In public markets, things change every single day. And that can be a good thing if you're investing in things and you want to be able to change your mind or change your point of view as you see things in the market. There's also a lot of noise, but velocity will be very different. So that could be a preferential thing. And then temperament is the other. Public markets can be really stressful. You could be right about a thesis if you have a 12-month view, 24-month view, but you could just get pummeled on a day-to-day basis if Trump is doing things with tariffs, or if there's uncertainty in a certain aspect of macro, or there are just so many factors that impact stocks on a day-to-day basis that
are out of your control,
that are totally exogenous, that create sometimes opportunities for you to build positions in the public market, but you need to have a certain temperament. Whereas in private equity, I never felt stressed about, like, even when we'd look at public companies that we were looking to take private and they had a good quarter and they had good earnings, like, and the stock was up, I never felt stressed that we like missed something or didn't, because again, the duration was a lot longer. And so stylistically, I would say there's no bad decisions here, right? If you can get a job in one of the two, go for it.
Yeah.
But those are maybe some stylistic aspects that you could have preferences on. And then I would say if you totally ambivalent, you should just go to private equity first, because you'll always have optionality to go to the public.
Yeah. Longer duration, and because you control the business, you have a lot more levers you can pull to improve the performance and whatnot, right? Versus public markets investing, you don't control the business, and so they can do whatever they want and you might not know about it.
You do. Right? I would say, like, let's not overstate kind of, the controlling investor has a lot of influence on what happens in the business, but the majority, I would say, of private equity firms really still focus on acquiring and investing in very good leadership to make those decisions for the business, because the private equity firm may have hundreds of portfolio companies. And I would not claim to be, smart enough in my private equity roles to be like, well, I'm seeing the business not do X and Y and Z. I can just get in there and like roll up my sleeves and fix it, right? Yeah. I love being on the operator side now, but at the time that I was in private equity, I would not, I sat in the boardroom on companies. I wasn't smart enough to be somebody who could fix the business.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think a lot of times when I talk to students, the way most students think about, and this is understandable because they haven't been through it, so they don't have the level of insights that you would be able to have, which is why I wanted to ask you about it. But a lot of them just like, it's very simplistic. They're like, oh, in PE, you're working much longer hours than at a hedge fund. Like, you're working sometimes even like banking hours. So that job is probably like a lot more stressful. But in reality, you may be working longer hours or shorter hours at a hedge fund, but you're actually more stressed out because like you're not fully in control of how your picks are performing. And also, even when you're not working, you're probably still constantly on and following the news and what's going on in the markets and what is Trump doing and all these things. And so you're still kind of working regardless, is kind of what I've heard from my hedge fund friends.
That's right. Yeah. The intellectual intensity on the public market side is much higher, not necessarily because it's, you're doing harder work than private equity, but because there's so much more noise to filter, right? And when I was on the public side, I missed just like the clarity of being able to look at one company for a very intense targeted period of time under NDA with access to management to come to a view, as opposed to like the market just changes constantly. People are constantly publishing research. Earnings come out every 3 months. So many things can change on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for sure. I never recruited for a hedge fund and I never worked at a hedge fund, but for people who are interested in recruiting for hedge fund jobs. I feel like one big difference that I notice is for investment banking and private equity, I feel like the process is a lot more similar from firm to firm, right? And so there's a lot more resources available out there in terms of like these are the questions you should expect, or like for if you're interviewing for P, like you got to know how to build the LBO model, right? And so it almost makes it, I feel like, easier, and it's also probably why there's a lot more resources out there. Whereas for hedge funds, I feel like there's so many different strategies, and there's just not like this uniform way to go about preparing for it. So like, how did you prepare for those interviews? And also like for people who want to go down the hedge fund path, like how do you prepare yourself, or what are some things you can do? And even like when I try to look up some of these hedge funds, like I go to their website and there's like no
There's nothing.
information.
Yeah.
It's like you can log in if you're an investor. Otherwise, like it's literally just like the name of the firm and that's it. Right?
Yeah.
So like, how did you go about kind of preparing for those interviews?
So when I was at Wharton, I interviewed for summer internships at hedge funds, and then obviously was lucky to get a full-time offer, so I didn't have to go through the full-time recruiting process. But I got coached at Wharton on, what does it take to get through hedge fund interviewing? And there were a lot of folks at Wharton that either came from the public markets or were trying to get into it. So there was good coaching there. A big part of it is explaining your background as you would in any role. And then a really big part of it is what are your ideas? So in hedge fund interviews, you're asked to pitch what stock ideas do you have? What sectors do you like? Certain funds might ask you about macro. Not a lot of every single hedge fund interview I had, they wanted me to pitch 1, 2, 3 ideas, long or short. If you're interviewing at a long only fund, don't take short ideas in, right? Focus on your long ideas. Certain funds had duration points of view. So they would want to know if you had a 3-month view or a 6-month view versus if you had a 1 to 2 year view. So it was actually really hard to work on even 2, 3, 4 ideas, stock ideas, long and short, and then be ready to kind of talk about them intensely and in detail in any interview. But that's very much a part of the process. So you just have to be ready for that. And again, very similar to other types of processes where you have to practice with your friends. Like practice. Like I could get on the phone with you and you could just I could just tell you beforehand, like hammer me on pitching you a stock and convincing you that it's the most brilliant idea. And then you could just attack me in a mock interview on what's your idea? What about this? Like, are you worried about that? I'm Googling this right now and I see that this is like, a bear case, or I just, asked for the bear case on ChatGPT. Tell me why the bear case doesn't make sense. Like what's the catalyst? What's going to cause investors to go the way that you think the stock is going to go? How do you think about this relative to other things in its sector? Why is this the best risk reward? Like all of that stuff. It's really hard to prepare for all of that, but that's what it takes when you go into hedge fund interviewing.
But it seems like one of the first steps, though, to do that effectively is you do have to be able to at least know a little bit about the fund's strategy or how they like to invest. And so are you able to just find that information online, or like,
so
do they tell
13Fs.
you beforehand?
Yeah. So
13.
funds file 13Fs, usually I think 90 days after the end of the quarter. So you're able to see what's in their portfolio. So if you're interviewing at a fund, or if you're interested in a fund and you notice that like all of their investments are in software and internet, don't go in there and pitch a consumer retail stock, right? Like that's kind of obvious. And then talk to people. The hedge fund community, as big as it might seem, is quite small. If you've worked at a few hedge funds, and I have friends that have, they know most people at most funds, and they could either help you find someone who is familiar with or used to work at a fund that you're interested in. So those are good ways to learn more. Also, just look at the founders. Like you search for a fund, you can find the people that work there on LinkedIn, and you can look at their backgrounds. And it would not be surprising to you if you saw a guy who worked in private equity or worked in public markets and covered software and is now the portfolio manager and head of a fund. That person's probably got a bias towards software because they've been doing that for a lot of their career. There are ways to kind of fish through the information and see what's useful.
That's really good advice. Yeah. So basically, get resourceful, piece it together from publicly available information if it's not available on their website, and then from there, you really have to have a point of view.
Yes.
And also be able to defend it, not just like surface level stuff, but they're going to really grill you and drill down like multiple levels and double click on stuff. And you just have to be prepared for that. And that requires you to get a lot of practice reps in before you do the real thing.
Yeah. And by the way, that same prep also prepares you to ask questions and be thoughtful in the interview process, right? Like hedge fund people, I consider myself a buy side thinker. Like we really like talking about companies. We really like talking about positions. We really like talking about, obviously the winners, but even some of the ones that we learned a lot from that we lost money on, ask those questions. And, you have rare opportunities in hedge fund interview processes to meet people who are really good at this and have clearly built a career around it. If you're not ready to ask them questions like that, you're missing a chance to show them that you're really curious and intellectually excited to do that kind of work.
Yeah, I feel like if this is not something you're genuinely passionate about, it's really hard to fake it
Yes.
to the degree that's necessary to actually land one of these jobs. Like if you're not normally interested in analyzing businesses and investing and not like, gambling, but like actually investing and, looking at it from like an investor's point of view, whether you should invest in a company or not, having a long thesis, short thesis, and having good reasons why, then it's probably not the right job for you anyway.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. The 3 years I had in Chicago, my wife would tell you this. It was really hard for me to not think about the names that I was studying on the weekends and the evenings. And my wife still teases me now. I love just
Hey, Vishal, pay attention to me.
yeah, exactly. Like, no, she like even now, my friends, my wife, like everyone knows, like all I like doing is talking about work because I'm really interested in what I'm doing, really interested in what I'm spending time on. And there is some value, I think, in just being fully obsessed, and probably unhealthily so, in what you're spending time on.
No, I joke about it because we've all gotten that from our wives. It's
Yes.
like I'm just like zoned out thinking about my work, and then like, hey, are you there?
Yeah,
Like,
right, right.
oh, sorry.
I mean, I would also come, my wife was in residency and then fellowship while we were in Chicago, and I would come home and I'd be like, can I practice pitching you like Qualcomm stock? And so she could probably explain to you Qualcomm's business model, not because she wants to or she's interested, but because like I forced her to help me prepare for how to think through that when I was working on it. So
That's real. That's real love,
yeah,
man.
that's real